So I wanted to talk a little bit about the thought process that people have of wiping out people from their lives. And, this is something that I recommend to a degree, because if you have somebody in your life who is really detrimental to you and to your mental health, then your best bet is probably to limit the amount of contact that you have with that person. But this becomes really problematic when that person is somebody who's in your family, because it's a question of, do you stop seeing your family forever? And that's a really difficult one. And there was a point in my life where I retracted myself from members of my family, where I didn't see them for a very long time actually, and didn't speak to them, and that was what was necessary at the time. And I think that sometimes you have to have the foresight to understand that a relationship that you have with somebody is damaging, and you have to take time away from them to be able to heal. But how long does that last? And I think that if you are working on yourself during the time that you are away from them, then there should be a point where you can come back into contact with them. It's this sort of thing about abstinence that, for instance, if you're an alcoholic, then if you spend all of your life never going back into a pub again, never being around alcohol, never being around, the thing that causes you issue, are you really healed? Because you've never really kind of tested the theory. And I'm not suggesting that, you're a heroin addict and you should go and, get a needle and some heroin and sit it in front of you and test the theory as to whether or not you're magically healed from your addiction. But I think that what's important is that you do at some point go back into the lion's den, as it were, and you see your healing in action. And I think that, I've got people who are in my life that have taken the opposite action, and they've decided to remove themselves from a situation and not be part of people's lives anymore. And for some people that might work, but from my perspective, I'm thinking, how much of yourself are you cutting off for that process of staying out of harm's way? And I think that something that was quite an interesting process, I went to go and see a shaman for healing, and I saw a couple of shamans over the period of time when I was sort of going through my process of healing and working with, energy work and healing myself. I saw counsellors and shaman and psychotherapists and psychologists and doctors and herbalists and healers and Reiki workers and light workers and all sorts. I've seen lots of people, and I've done lots of things in my path to where I am now. But I went to go and see a shaman, and I took a substance called Sears Salvia, and this is a really powerful hallucinogenic that takes you out of your normal mind and puts you into a different state. And something that I saw when I was on this, and this was at the time when I was not in contact with my father at all. And this was done intentionally by myself. And spiritually, I think that you are your mother and you are your father. And I think that if you can have opportunity in your life where you can come to get to know that person, where you can come to understand them, that's where a lot of the healing actually happens. And when I went to have this hallucinogenic trip, I saw myself split into two, and there was like on my mother's side of me where I had kind of had lots of kind of nurturing and a lot of the things I had learned from being a child to an adult. My mum always calls me her mini-me, which is true to some degree. But at that time, that half of me was very clear, and I could see every facet of that and how that had come to pass. And I could see, the lineage, the genetic lifeline, the DNA and the every part of that side of my life and my body and me and my thoughts and my memory and everything that came from my mother's side and so forth. And then on this other side was just this great dark abyss, because I hadn't really ever taken the time to get to know my father. And this is stupid because my dad's in my life. My dad was always in my life. But there was problems, as there always are in families. But, there was this great abyss of nothingness. And, in this hallucinogenic trip, in this moment of, what was, the spirit elders, the drug, the inner self, the psyche, whatever the hell you want to call it, wherever woo-woo or non-woo or psychological or scientific, whatever the fuck you want to think of it as to pacify yourself, but I saw on this other side this absolute total abyss. And this was me. This was part of me. This is part of me, my parents are part of me, and they are, it's like we're standing in a line, and at the moment I'm at the front, or I'm at the end of that line, but this line goes back and back and back and back and back, generation to generation to generation. And behind me on my father's line I could see nothing, because I'd never taken the time to find out what that meant. And I suppose this kind of leads into, people that have grown up without knowing their fathers, or without, maybe not knowing their biological parents or being adopted or whatever. There is an intrinsic yearning genetically, spiritually, deep down with us that we need to know what that means, what that is. And I think that, this experience, this shamanic experience that I was having, was telling me about the fact that I couldn't truly fully be myself or reach my potential, because I only knew half of myself. And so I think that when people kind of ostracize people out of their lives and they don't heal themselves to the point that they can have contact with people that have hurt them, people that have damaged them, whatever, they do an injustice to themselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that people should put themselves in harm's way, but what I am saying is that if you are truly healed from a situation and you temper your expectations, I think this is what is really important as well when you're dealing with other people, especially when you're dealing with people who are hurt, that hurt people. You need to temper your expectations of them, and that's really difficult to do when you are dealing with parents, because you have an expectation of them. You expect them to be like the parents that you see with your friends, that you expect them to be like the parents that you see on films and movies and things, and that's not going to happen. You have to learn to love your parents for who they are and what they are, and understand that they are standing at the end of a line that has led them to where they are being. And if you sit and you take the time to understand why they are the way they are, that's where empathy and forgiveness and love can come in, and you can take the higher ground, and you can start a process of true forgiveness, where you can have a relationship with somebody that is fulfilling and I don't know, necessary for both of you, that can be worth something, you know. And I think that you need to temper your expectations. I think that you need to truly forgive, and I think to be able to truly forgive, you need to truly understand somebody's thought processes, and you can't understand those thought processes if you've never sat down to ask them questions or talk to them or to listen. You know, and a lot of time when we think about kind of like when we've had problems in families and things, we want an apology. We want them to apologise because that would, you know, validate our feelings or emotions and stuff. It's like the apology isn't the important part. The important part is finding out the why did they behave the way they did, because most often than not the people behaved the way that they did was because they were hurt and they were damaged in some way, and they were trying to act through it. And often, you know, cycles of abuse runs through families, so it's a case that they were abused, their parents abused them, their parents abused them, their parents abused them, and the cycle just goes on. And if you don't take the time to find that out, if you don't take the time to stop and rectify that, then you will continue the abuse cycle, because you haven't dealt with it, you haven't dealt with your demons, you haven't dealt with your past, and you haven't learned to heal your heart fully. And it is a case that you have to be able to sit and be with somebody and have forgiven them fully to the point that you can be with them, you know, and have a relationship with them and not feel vitriolic or hatred or anger towards them. You know, if you're feeling those feelings, you haven't dealt with your feelings, you know. And this doesn't mean that, you know, I'm not in a situation where I am to be abused, but it's almost like when the forgiveness comes, then the relationship changes, because most people act, you know, badly because they don't feel heard. They act badly because they're misunderstood. They act badly because they want people to understand them. And I think that when you take the time to stop and understand your pain and deal with it, and then go out, like almost an out-of-body experience, to understand really what was going on in a situation. Because a lot of the times when people are being bullied or abused or whatever, you can only be the first person player, and you can just sit there and you can think that I'm going through this, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. And I think if you know, at one point I was meditating on something with the shaman at a different time, and had like an out-of-body experience to see the world, to see something that was happening at the time when I was a kid, you know, and see it from an out-of-body experience, an out-of-person experience. And if you can try and take this approach where you see what's going on outside, you know, you can understand something from a third person part, you know, from a third party idea. And it's so valuable, because you suddenly realise that you're all hurt. You know, everybody in the situation is being damaged. Everybody in the situation is hurt. Everybody in the situation is the victim. You know, and I think a lot of the time people don't realise that. You know, they feel like they're the victim and they're the perpetrator. And when you set up that very clear parameter, it's very difficult to feel love or compassion or humanity towards the other person. You've turned them into a monster in effect, and so there is no forgiveness and love and compassion for that person. But I think that at some point, you know, the beauty of this life that we live is in humanity and in love and in keeping that line going. And if you don't spend the time to get to know what's behind you, where you stand at the end of that line, in the end of that heritage and dynasty, then you are doomed to repeat its failings. And I think that how can you truly be yourself and reach your greatest, intentions and integrity and beauty and capability when possibly you only know half of yourself? Because you're not just you. You're not just your ego and your sense. I'm not just Laura. I am the lineage of my whole family, and that will continue to be. So I think forgiveness is really important. I think remembering who you are from all aspects is super important. And I think that if you are taking time away from people so you can heal. Take that time to heal. Actually do the goddamn healing. Do the forgiveness and then come back. Because you don't come back for their benefit so much as you come back for yours. Because you are going to end up living a half life. And you will repeat cycles. Good luck.